Hey, how's it going?
It is going pretty well. It is a beautiful sunny day here in Missouri, and I'm just in a good mood. Uh, I don't know that I have anything special to say about it other than I love being somewhere where it is sunny in the middle of the winter. That is so wonderful to me.
Yeah, that is great. We've actually also had a few days of sun out here, but it has meant like completely clear skies and very, very cold temperatures at night. And so we're very frosty around here these days, but
Ooh,
yeah, but no rain, which is kind of a nice change.
yeah. So, other than I'm sure you are in mourning for the lack of rain, how are you doing?
Yeah, I think I'm doing pretty well. Not a lot to say, honestly. A little bit of family time, a little bit of connecting with different parts of my family here and there, a little bit of reading. Yeah, life is good.
Nice. Well, man, I am so excited to talk to you today. I messaged you a sort of an outline of what I wanted to talk about because I wanted to get your thoughts on something that I came across. Did you have a chance to look at the article, The Six Stages of Faith, that I sent to you?
Yes, this is very intriguing. There's a lot to talk about here.
I know. I found it because I was getting ready for a lecture in my church business administration class. And we were on the week where we were going to talk about leading ministries. And the one thing that I felt like was missing from the various textbooks and whatever is how important, in the context of leading ministries, it is to lead your leaders well. This is
Mm,
so incredibly important to me and has always been something that I am intrigued by. I remember when I was first pastoring, I had my first meeting with a reasonably mature follower of Jesus. And my sort of discipleship bag of tricks included make sure they are reading their Bible, make sure that they are praying, make sure that they are serving somewhere in the church. And that was about it. And
yeah.
I remember calling my dad and saying, Dad, now what do I do? Like, how do I disciple people past that? And this particular approach to understanding the pathway of spiritual growth from this book, The Critical Journey by Hagberg and Gulich, really, I think, offers an interesting insight into how we can understand spiritual growth after we've gotten the basics down.
Mm, yeah.
So I guess I'm curious your thoughts as you look at this in terms of when, I put up this little limerick for my students. I said, generally speaking, what we think of as discipleship is the following limerick: read your Bible, pray every day, stop those sins, you'll be okay.
I've never heard that. Did you come up with that?
Yes, I think so. I don't think I heard it anywhere, but that just feels to me like what we're telling people most of the time, right? If you read
Yes.
your Bible, if you pray, and if you stop sinning, you're checking the list.
Yes.
And I just felt like for the many of us who need something deeper than that, I thought Hagberg and Gulich's model offered a lot. And so I'm curious to hear if you also felt that way and what your thoughts on it were as you read it over.
Yeah. So let me briefly recap the stages so that I can talk a little bit more directly about it. So stage one, recognition of God. This might, for most of us, we call this our conversion experience. Stage two, the life of discipleship. This is learning about faith, integrating it into daily life. You're just growing in your faith. Stage three, the productive life. This is where you really start serving in some capacity. Maybe it's missions, maybe it's in your local church, maybe it's in your community somehow, but you're taking your discipleship outward in some way. And then
Let's pause. Can we pause there for a second?
yeah,
I just want to note, as you're describing this, how perfectly up till now this matches my perspective on what we're doing in the local church and our experience of, because basically what we have here is somebody gets saved in stage one. They have the sort of spiritual fervor of a new relationship with Jesus. And then what do? We plug them into a small group or something, right? And that's that stage two life of discipleship. Here, read this book. Here, read your Bible, pray every day, get engaged in this small group, all that kind of stuff. And then what do we do after that? Let's find a way to help you serve. There's that stage three, the productive life. We're gonna help you think outside of yourself by being a volunteer in Sunday school or kids ministry or youth ministry or being a greeter or on the worship team or whatever. Right? Like,
yeah,
does that capture church life to you? And I'm not saying this positively or negatively. I'm just saying I was really caught by how perfectly these three stages capture church life.
yes, it captures it very, very well. The fascinating thing is that these guys don't end at stage 3. And so we have many, many other stages to get through. And these are the really critical ones, in my opinion. But if I'm being honest, I feel like most churches focus their efforts on taking people from stage 2 to stage 3. We need to disciple people well. We need to make sure that they have a mentor or teacher. We need to teach them every single week. We need to make sure that they're growing in their faith, that they're understanding what they're doing. And we need to help them plug in to serve. And, there's the great old 80-20 rule that people bemoan all the time. 20% of people do 80% of the work in the church. And how do you convert more and more people in the church to active service? And I feel like so much of our discipleship efforts focus on stages 2 and 3. And particularly in many churches, moving people from stage 2 to stage 3.
Yeah, so much so that I think it has gotten into our language, right? Like frequently we talk about this as a leadership pipeline rather than a discipleship process, right? That talks about what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get things done, not
Yeah.
help you become mature.
Right.
And
Right.
and on some level, I mean, to back up here, I think there are some really good reasons the church focuses on stages 2 and 3, because really what I think has happened, if we look at the church's history over our lifetimes, let's say, I think we grew up in churches often that were only focusing on evangelism, right? Stage 1. We just got to get people saved and then they're all set. And there was a sort of recognition that that was not enough. And so then what got added was a focus on discipleship in small groups. We have all of these people who are following Jesus, but they're not getting discipled. So let's make sure we're discipling them. All right, great. And then maybe 10 years ago, there was a sense of, oh, we're discipling all these people, but both they need to think of discipleship more broadly than just themselves, or they're going to be completely egocentric. And we need a lot more people to, as the church is becoming highly program driven, we need more people to run the church with us. So we had built some level of foundation in terms of thinking about discipleship to now let's get people serving in ministry. So it historically makes a lot of sense to me that we're in this space where these 3 stages are what we are familiar with the church thinking about. Does that match your experience?
It does. It matches quite a bit. I also am thinking, and this will be more clear as we go, but I'm also thinking that many of our church leaders have not experienced these latter stages of spiritual development that these authors lay out, and therefore have no guide for leading people beyond stages 1, 2, and 3. And I think as a 20-year-old pastor, or whatever age you were at the time, that was probably what led you to call your dad. Like, I've never been through stages 4, 5, and 6. I don't know how to lead somebody who's already reached stage 3 and needs something next new.
Oh, 100%. I had no idea. Yeah, exactly. Exactly what you just said is correct.
And I don't think that that's just a problem of hiring youthful pastors. I think whether we're hiring pastors in their 40s, 50s, 60s as well, sometimes they also have not gone through these latter stages. And therefore, we can only train to what we know. And if we only know stages 2 and 3, discipleship and getting involved in public life, then that's where we're going to stop. And that's where everybody we lead is going to stop.
100%. And the other piece of these upcoming stages, I think there are two challenges that we run into as well. Not only have a bunch of leaders not gotten there, but when we're talking about this, I think that there is a temptation to try to sandwich our experience into these later stages. So we're going to actively reinterpret our experience in a way that levels us up if we're not careful. And I think this is part of a culture in which we have trained up and coming leaders to think of themselves in a certain way. It's this language that we use all the time that I think is actually spiritually very unhealthy. You are so mature for your age. That sets people up to think about themselves and their experience in a very particular way, assuming, number one, my experience is different from everybody else's. Number two, I know more or have done more or have gotten further than everybody else. All sorts of things that I think work great until you hit what comes after stage 3.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that, because that matches my experience so perfectly. I was told all the time that I was so mature for my age and that, I don't know, I just had these giftings or whatever. Boy, did I think a lot of myself and think that I had advanced beyond my peers in so many ways. And maybe in one or two ways I had, but certainly not in all the ways I thought I had. And you're right. Part of that is me and how I responded to that. I have to own that. But part of that is, you're right, those comments set me up for that.
Absolutely. Well, and I've been reading, kind of to weave this in a little bit, but I've been reading The Dark Night of the Soul by John of the Cross. And one of the things he talks about is that in these earlier stages, the 7 deadly sins have spiritual parallels. So there is a spiritual pride that he talks about that immature Christians have, where they think they're further along than they are. There's a spiritual gluttony that he talks about, where Christian people are constantly consuming spiritual materials as if the more you consume, the better you are. And on down the line he goes. And one of the things he talks about is that we need something to happen in our lives that shatters those spiritual ways of sinning that are so much more subtle and so much more insidious, because many of our spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual activities blind us to those spiritual ways of being sinful. And I think stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, this is, you can be reading your Bible, you can be praying all the time, you can be serving in the church, all of these things, but the spiritual pride, the spiritual gluttony, all of those kinds of things can turn you into the Pharisee instead of the tax collector. Wow, God, I
Mm,
am so lucky to be me. I am
yes.
doing so well. And I think sometimes we get on the verge of saying, God, you are so lucky to have me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and I heard a preacher once say the way that we Christianize this is by standing in the back of the church and saying, God, thank you so much for not like making me like those other Pharisees. I am so glad that I am a tax collector. Look how amazing I am.
Hmm.
And flipping the script, but still having the heart of a Pharisee. Um, but anyway, all I just wanted to pause because there's so much going on in those three stages. But I interrupted you as you were kind of summarizing kind of the six stages. So go ahead, jump back into your summary.
Well, and so this next part is not even a stage. It's maybe what we would call an interlude or an event that causes you to move from stage 3 to stage 4. And so once you have become a Christian and you have been discipled, not that discipleship ever ends, but you have obtained some level of discipleship and you have done some level of service, oftentimes there is this wall, this crisis of faith. And man, oh man, we do not talk about this enough. We have so many people deconstructing their faith. And at the end of this deconstruction, they have no faith at all. When in reality, some level of deconstruction is exactly what we all go through multiple times in our life. Like that's something else these authors point out. These stages are not just linear. It's not like you go from stage 2 to stage 3 and you never come back to stage 2 or whatever. Like you hit these stages multiple times over the course of life. So this deconstruction idea is really just, well, I love the way the authors put it here. The wall represents a period of spiritual crisis where old ways of experiencing faith no longer work. In other words, I conceived of God in a certain way. I conceived of myself in a certain way. I engaged with God in light of both of those perceived realities. And now I have discovered a whole nother layer of reality that completely throws off what I thought I knew about God, what I thought I knew about the world, what I thought I knew about myself. And I have to rearrange all of the pieces to make it all fit again. And it doesn't feel like they fit. And so there's this wall, this crisis of faith where you really have to sort all this out, which leads to stage 4, the journey inward, where you're really introspective and trying to work all this out. And I think this is a critical part of the journey. And because we're not talking about it as a church, and because many of our leaders have not honestly wrestled with this stage, many in the church are ill-equipped to handle this moment. And I think they leave the church as a result.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. It's so funny to me that you identified a relationship between the wall and the kind of cultural deconstruction movement. I did not catch that. But my students, when we talked about this, absolutely did. And
Hmm.
it really, as they were kind of processing it out loud, it opened my eyes to the exact same point that you were just making, which is that all these folks who are deconstructing think they're doing something that's unique or odd, or they're the first sort of generation to do it, or they're only doing it because the church messed up. And maybe this is a
Hmm.
major chunk of why the wall is necessary, because the church is going to be profoundly broken in its expression in every generation. And there comes a moment where you have to wrestle with that and acknowledge it, and acknowledge the ways it has formed you in broken ways. So,
Well, you just illustrated that a moment ago. where you said there was a period of time in church history where we were placing a high emphasis on evangelism. All we have to do is get people saved. And the generation that came behind said, wait a minute, that's not the only thing to focus on. Once they're in the building, once they're in the faith, we have to disciple these people. And then another generation said, yeah, discipleship is wonderful, but we also got to get these people serving, right? And it's all of these corrective movements that happen from generation to generation that take some of the unhealthy parts of the church before them and try to fix it. Unfortunately, we create our own problems and leave behind some things that we probably shouldn't have left behind in the process. And so the brokenness continues. But you're exactly right. The church is going to be broken, and we're always, whether it privately or communally, going to be coming up against this crisis of faith, this wall where the old ways of experiencing faith are no longer working, and we have to make adjustments. We have to put the new pieces together.
Well, and what that kind of makes me wonder about is if sort of my generation, your generation was the generation that was saying in leadership, hey, no, hold on. We need to really focus on finding ways to serve. We were the stage 3 leaders. It makes perfect sense to me that the next generation of followers of Jesus in this kind of new era is saying, no, hold on. The thing we need to focus on is a crisis of faith. That builds very naturally in this model. And again, to your point that you said a moment ago when you were describing it, the problem is when we think of a crisis of faith as a bad thing rather than as an inevitable thing in the process of growth.
Well, and I don't think it guarantees that we move on to stage 4.
No,
and I think
that's exactly, you're absolutely right.
I think the global deconstruction movement is an example of that very thing. We might hit this wall as a church and say, it's too broken. It doesn't make any sense, or I don't believe in this, or I don't want to believe in this, and walk away from it all. And so we may have a bunch of rubble to put back together once this movement is finished. Not to say every part of the church will be affected in the same way, but and I think personal lives, right? Some people choose to move through the wall, move into this inward journey, and really sort some of these new pieces out, and some people don't.
Absolutely. Well, and as you're saying that, I find myself asking, as a community, if someone is going through this process of the wall, this experience of the wall, it may be that, maybe even obviously, the worst thing we could possibly say is, oh, you're questioning these things that I hold dearly, then you can't be a part of this community anymore. If that were to be our stance, the probability of people successfully navigating their crisis of faith would decrease profoundly. And I think to some degree that's what we've done.
I think so too. I also think we've disincentivized paid staff from dealing openly with this as well. Oh, you're questioning some of the tenets of the faith? You can't be a pastor then. You're going to lose your livelihood if you really sit down and wrestle with this and process this. Or there's no way we're going to give you, a sabbatical while you sit down and really work some stuff out with God. No way. We pay you to be our pastor. You need to show up and do your job. And so there's no opportunity for a paid staff person to really openly and genuinely wrestle through this because they've got the fear of their job on the line.
Oh, absolutely. And let's be honest, I think that these are evangelical problems. If you are, a lot of my friends have found a very safe home in a mainline denomination where it is perfectly safe to ask these questions. Perfectly fine to be having a crisis of faith. And there is absolutely no pressure to come out the other side with any particular answers because there is an honest respect for the process.
Which I appreciate the honest respect for the process. I I want that in our evangelical spheres as well, but with more compassionate mentorship, with more purposefulness, and
Well,
lots of patience.
and hopefully a healthier stages 1 and 2, right? If we can ground people in good theology in stages 1 and 2, and by good theology, I don't mean rigid theology, I just mean good theology. And we've done a lot of talking about that over the years on this podcast. But if we can ground people in really good Bible centered thinking, giving them the space to go through a crisis of faith is may well come out differently.
It may. I would actually love to adjust that slightly. We've talked about so much the different circles, right? The father church, like the more theology driven church, the spirit church, the more engagement experiential part of the church, and the Jesus church, the more service oriented aspect of the church. And when you say we need to make sure these guys have good theology, that hits my father church experience. But I also found my father church experience a little bit hollow and a little bit unhelpful through my own crisis of faith, because what theology neglects is the God behind the theology and an experiential relationship with the God of the Bible. And so my own wall lasted probably 10 years. And, well, my wall was the precipitating cause of the journey inward. And I would say my journey inward lasted about 10 years. And it required me to engage with God as a person and have a genuine, trusting relationship with that person. And maybe that only comes on the other side of the wall. In some of the things that the authors say here, it seems to indicate that might be true. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't want stages 1 and 2 to only deal with theology.
That's an excellent point. The other thing you just said that I thought was really profoundly insightful, just for where I'm at, like I feel like stepping out of ministry opened me up to go through the wall, to hit the wall, because my sense of identity was centered on stage 3, the productive life. And when I stepped out of that and couldn't be productive anymore, the loss of that really has precipitated a lot of questions for me and kind of a loss of identity for me and those kinds of things. And I feel like it has been a year and a half that I've kind of been entering into this. And that feels so long. And yet I feel like I'm still at the beginning. And so I am so grateful for you to say, wow, that part of it was a 10-year journey for me. Like, oh, thank you. Okay. So I think again, as a highly productive person, I'm like, all right, how can I get through this stage as efficiently as possible? Right? Like,
yeah.
Which is entirely the wrong question and perhaps entirely counterproductive to ask. And so I just love you saying, hey, I was there for like 10 years. Oh, okay. Then I probably can just chill out a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it was so long. It was so painful to be there for 10 years. So I hope you're able to navigate it faster than that, but I hope you're able to navigate it just, very, very successfully. I think that's my bigger hope.
Yeah.
And, I love what this author is saying about them. This is the characteristics of the journey inward: a growing awareness of personal weakness, motivations, and sins, a deeper dependence on God's grace and love, and it's often accompanied by solitude, prayer, and introspection. And the challenges are letting go of old patterns and beliefs and facing unresolved emotional or spiritual wounds. Man, oh man. I, in some sense, we might not ever unpack all of that, but that's such a critical journey. And I feel like it's only possible. And I feel like I was probably, I don't know, 70 or 80% of the way through that journey when I started seminary. And man, oh man, was seminary just such a rich experience for me coming at the end of that journey inward. And I feel like I'm poised for the journey outward. I don't know that I'm fully there yet, but I'm poised for it. And so it says, after navigating the wall and the journey inward, believers re-engage with the world, but now with the transformed perspective. Faith becomes rooted, I love this, faith becomes rooted in a deep trust in God and a desire to serve others selflessly. I feel like I'm on the verge of stage 5 right now. And then stage 6 is, just to make sure we cap all of them, I would love to get to someday. Stage 6 says the life of love. The final stage represents full surrender to God and a life characterized by radical love, humility, and service. It reflects a Christ-like attitude of unconditional love and compassion. Man, that sounds amazing.
No kidding, huh? I have very little to say about that other than yes, please, I'll take that someday. But one thing I'm deeply struck by as you were reading the journey inward, in the summary that we got of this, it says, a believer retreats from ministry activities to focus on the relationship with God. I was struck, and I said this to my students when I was kind of walking them through this. Can you imagine how complicated it would be if we used some of our traditional answers in this moment of a believer's life? Right? Like, oh, you're feeling disconnected from the church? Oh, you don't feel as confident as you did? Okay, why don't you just serve more? That's the wrong solution to this moment. That was a great solution to stage 3. Oh, you're growing and you need to really do something with what you're learning. Wonderful. Let's get you serving. But now in stage 4, I think it's a very different thing. And stage 5, I think, again, it's a very different thing. I'm guessing the stage 5 way of serving and ministering is far less systemic, far less programmatic, far more relational. But maybe that's me guessing. But I'm just struck by the way in which each of these stages, including the wall as a kind of interlude, require different things from the community that is walking with the person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It really does. And I'll tell you, I mean, my own personal journey of that journey inward and the wall, maybe it's a characteristic of that stage, but I did not feel like I had a lot of support or wise guides to show me where I was and what I was supposed to be doing. Maybe it wouldn't have lasted 10 years if I'd have had that. I would like to think it wouldn't have.
Well, this is exactly my question for you as someone who feels like they have just recently finished navigating these kind of the wall and then stage 4, the journey inward. What did you need from your spiritual community? What would have been helpful? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah. That's where I feel like stage 2 is really crucial. Because if in stage 2, you can establish a genuine community and a genuine mentor worth following, or you can get plugged in where there is a pastor worth following, and you have some real trusted guides in your life, and that relationship is already built, that trust is already established, then wow, does that help that final stage, or not final stage, stage 4, the journey inward. And there are people you can talk to that will listen without judgment, will listen in light of a broader relationship and the established trust that you already have. And to be honest, you were that person for me. And others as well. My mentor, Dean, was fantastic. These are people that could see me for who I was and allow me just to process. And there was no, okay, well, you told me this, now you have to do that. Or any sort of judgment or any sort of critique. It was just unconditional acceptance while I processed. And that was so, so helpful.
Makes a ton of sense. So, first of all, I love the way you're tying these together. Boy, if we as a church were thinking about, and if and or when I go back into local church ministry, one of the things I find myself thinking about is how to tie believers together, particularly intergenerationally.
Hmm.
Like if that were our focus, hey, just cultivate relationships, and the church I was working at the longest, we banged the drum of make sure there's room at the table, connect with people you haven't connected with before. And that's a good, maybe here's where the 80-20 rule would actually work. 80% of your relational energy should be engaged in developing long-term relationships that are these kind of people that you can lean on in the hard moments. And 20% needs to be making sure there's room at the table for somebody who is new, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But man, cultivate community in which there are people who are further ahead than you. I'm just curious what it would look like if that were and not necessarily structured community, just if that were the drum we banged as a local church, what would that mean for the local church?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Totally agree. I think the thing that makes that hard in the church and why it's so easy to neglect this step is you can't systematize that. You can't conjure up trust. You can't programize trust and building relationship. You can set up system and structures that make it more likely than it was before, and you can hope for the best. But I mean, nobody could have arranged your friendship and mine, but they did put a whole bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds in one space and tried to educate them and went, yeah, I'm sure they'll probably make friends at some point. You know what I mean? Like it's, there's no guaranteed outcomes in our program, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that this is something we could talk a lot about, but I think you're right. Systematizing it, the whole you measure what matters approach would not work for this. It's something you could build into church life. As people join the church, you could say, let's just be real. Our expectation is that you cultivate relationships in this church. And so we ask you to build that into your life in some way, shape, or form. You could build it into the way you preach, training, discipling people to cultivate a life in which they cultivate community. But it would be very complicated to count how many people are doing this, how well.
Mm.
And you're right. I think that makes it hard to be the thing we focus too much on. Because in theory, right, our systematized approach to this is small groups.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you have some relationships in your life from a small group that is more than 10 years old.
Oh, goodness. No, it's close. It's 20 years old at this point.
So, I mean, if there is anybody who could be the advocate for that being a functional working approach, you guys are it. And yet, even you guys are more than willing to admit it's not the system that made it work.
Yeah.
It's the intangibles. It
is. Yeah. It's the system that gave it a chance to work. And I think we need to set up lots of little chances for the intangibles to take over.
I totally agree. And again, if I ever go into direct local church ministry, which I would not be surprised if that happened, I would be so intrigued. And this almost sounds hypocritical from what I just said, but to think systemically about how to foster this, even if you can't think systemically about how to force this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And to introduce some level of conversation around the wall and the journey inward. Not that,
Mm,
brand new believers need to like be told, hey, in about 5 years, things are going to come crashing down around you and you're going to have to kind of reinvent the wheel. Sorry. Not that it has to be a scary thing or some stumbling block for somebody, but for those who have been following Jesus a while and need to know that this is a normal stage and there are resources for you, there are people for you, there is patience for you, there is grace for you, there is a way to put all the pieces back together. Boy, do people need to know that. And to know that experientially. Like they can look to somebody and go, yeah, I know that because I know so-and-so went through that. And this is where they're at.
yeah, 100%. That is exactly right. And it's just talking about this, right? Like my church that I attend now, one of the traditions that they have that I think is super cool is for the month of December, in anticipation of the incarnation and the Christmas story, what we do is we just have people share their spiritual experience. They just tell their story. And several of the people who told their stories last year, there were elements of this in it.
Mm.
And they are like one of the folks that I deeply respect is somebody who's been a full-time professional Christian his whole life. And man, it was so powerful.
Man, I bet if you were to sit down and talk with that person, there is some level of community that lays behind his successful resolution of stage 4. There's a good friend. There is a group of friends. There is a mentor. There is somebody sitting in the wings that person would obviously point to and say, that person helped guide me through this.
Oh, I'm 100% sure you are correct because I know who that person is. I just happen to be friends with people that person is friends with, and they have told me some stories, not inappropriate stories that they shouldn't tell me, but just some very honoring and respectful anecdotes of some things that, yes, I think that's exactly right. There is a community around that person. And the flip side of this, by the way, that I think is so interesting is the community has become profoundly deeper by going through this together.
Yes.
You
Oh,
know,
that's
like,
so good.
they are deeply connected and could not be as connected as they are if they had not gone through complicated stuff together.
Yeah, and that's absolutely how I feel about our friendship, yours and mine. And it was interesting to me earlier in the conversation that you were pointing, hey, you've successfully resolved stage 4. So like, tell me what that's like. And I'm like, wait a minute. You were the one that guided me through stage 4. Like you've got a lot to contribute here in the stage 4, even though maybe you're re-entering stage 4 in a way. But I wonder if you'd characterize your story that way.
My current self-narrative of the story, of my story, is that I feel like I spent my pastoral life largely in stage 3, the productive life, and that my sense of identity was deeply engaged in stage 3, even while I cared passionately about the things of stage 4. But I cared about them in a way that was always, they had to take a back seat.
Mm.
Like I remember this moment, and this is and this is entirely about me, but we were sitting down, me, my lead pastor, and this amazing coach who was talking us through what our church needed to do to grow. And it became apparent that our church was probably 350 people at the time. We needed somebody who was going to be a systems and administration person. And up until that point, I had largely been the discipleship person. And I felt like the church needed an executive systems administration person. And I said, yeah, if that's what the church needs, that's what I want to do. And my lead pastor turned to me and said, is that really what you're passionate about? Like, do you want to be that person? And what was really going on in my heart was a fear of not still being the number two guy. I didn't want somebody else to step in and be the number two guy in charge of me, between me and the lead pastor. And so I stepped up to take that role when my heart was really in the discipleship stuff.
Mm.
And I tried to straddle that line from that moment forward. But you can't be in stage 4 and make stage 4 the back burner issue. And so I very voluntarily kept myself in stage 3.
So this, where it says a believer retreats from ministry activities to focus on the relationship with God, that's very crucial for your understanding of this part of the journey.
Oh, yes, because having built that sense of identity for so many years now, stepping out of ministry, suddenly it has been very shaking for me. I really have struggled with, who am I if I'm not that guy? And I still don't have an answer to that, to be very transparent. And it hits me like, that sounds in a lot of ways like a very simple thing to say, but I am profoundly uncomfortable and embarrassed and sad every time I go to church, because I am confused when I don't have a professional role. Every time I have a whole day to work that I'm not working in a church, I get, it really throws me off, because I had defined my identity around this stage 3 concept of being productive, even to the cost of what I was most passionate about. When really all I want to do is help people move forward. I mean, I want to be in the things of these later stages so badly. But again, I felt like the church needed something different from me. And so I just said, okay, I'll do those things. I will become a program expert rather than a people expert. And so I think that's how I would exegete my story currently.
Thank you so much for sharing that and being so vulnerable with it. I think it illustrates the challenges that the authors document here. That what are the challenges of stage 4? Letting go of old patterns and beliefs and facing unresolved emotional or spiritual wounds.
Yeah.
I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't planning on sharing all of that, but I'm more than happy to have done so.
Man, well, I'm with you in desperately wanting to be about the things of these latter stages. And goodness, I want to get there so bad. So I want to turn to the audience and just ask, where would you put yourself on this list? Are you just recently saved? Are you being discipled? Are you ministering to others? Have you hit the wall? Are you in your long journey inward? Have you moved outward? Or maybe you're one of those few that is living a life of love. Where are you at? And where is your community? Who are the people in your life that A, can help you through whatever stage you're in, or B, that you can help through stages that you've gone through? How's your community and where do you need to lean in? That's my question.
And that's so good.
Yeah. So, Josh, I want to honor your story and I want to honor the intensity of this conversation and just say, I think this is probably a good place to leave it. I don't know that I really want to get silly at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this has been a really powerful conversation, and I'm very curious to hear the thoughts of our listeners. But I think that's enough for today, and I will really look forward to getting to talk again next week.
All right. Me too. All right. I'll talk to you then.
All right. Talk to you then.